All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Western Wing. It's our attempt to bring exposure to some of the Western Canadian writers that we have. There's a lot of us, and I'm happy today to have three willing participants willing to give this a shot. Today, we're going to be talking about the amateur sleuth. What basically makes an amateur sleuth an amateur? I asked this question to the group, and Winona, being perhaps the most studious, brought us a definition. So we'll start there. And this is according to Goodreads. So an amateur sleuth is a mystery that features a protagonist who, having no professional direct ties to the police or other investigative agencies, stumbles upon and sets out to solve or help solve various crimes, most notably murder, but not necessarily. They do not receive monetary compensation for their investigation, which perhaps is key. Winona, I hope most of you know Winona because she is our Western rep for BC, Yukon, and Northwest Territories. Her amateur sleuth, Jason Davey, is a I lost the spot, sorry. Is
a amateur musician.
Amateur musician.
No, professional musician.
Professional musician, amateur sleuth, Jason Davey. I think she fits quite easily the category of amateur sleuth, but let's hear your 2 cents.
So I sort of sometimes feel like my stories don't fit squarely into any subgenre. I don't consciously set out to make my stories fit any hard and fast rules. I just write the story I want to write. And out of necessity, I have to slot it into a subgenre for marketing purposes. So Jason, my sleuth, always has a strong personal reason to want to get involved. So in Disturbing the Peace, which is sort of his first foray into actual mystery solving, he tries to find a missing musician who used to play with his mom's band. And in Notes on a Missing G-String, an old friend asks him to help solve the mystery of some missing money. And in Lost Time, which is the latest one, he tries to find out what happened to a young woman who was a huge fan of the band he's rehearsing with. And in the novel I'm currently writing, he's on tour with his mom's band, and he's trying to figure out whether a series of escalating mishaps and accidents are actually a focused attempt to harm and possibly kill his mother and him.
Oh.
Jason doesn't have any formal training, although I think I strongly hint that he's taken all the courses to be a PI. He just hasn't written the exam or got licensed yet, and I doubt he ever will, just like he promises to try and quit smoking, but never does. He doesn't solve murders, which makes my stories quite different from a lot of mysteries and things that are out there, because they're usually about murders, but there's no rule that says it has to be about a murder. Although people do usually die in the course of the story, murder isn't the primary focus. And I enjoy putting Jason into an intriguing situation and letting him and the readers try to figure out what's actually happening. And along the way, he's always put into danger and he suffers a little bit. I wanted to create a very attractive male character that women might love to read about.
Our second panelist today is Debra Purdy Kong. She's the author of the Vancouver-based Casey Holland mystery series. She's currently working on her first Casey novella called A Man with a Gold Satin Thong. I'm actually fortunate enough to be a member of the Port Moody Writers Group, where Debra is one of the instructors. And I've also heard the beginning of The Man with the Golden Satin Thong, and I'm very much waiting for the end. I don't know if crime writers want to hear this, but she's also taking a step outside of crime a little bit and trying her toes in urban fantasy, tentatively titled When Darkness Draws Near. But I'm hoping there's still going to be lots of Casey. So what's your thoughts on, like, you start to go a little bit off in the sense that she's insecurity, Casey's insecurity. Does that change you from being an amateur sleuth, or do you think you're still in the category?
To my mind, it doesn't. I know that some people will perceive it as kind of a gray area, Casey is an undercover security officer who works for a private bus company, a fictional bus company that I've created that has roots throughout the Lower Mainland. And her job is to deal with complaints that riders have registered, and her supervisor sends her out there. So she's dealing with people who are acting out. She deals with just even minor things like chronic smokers on the bus who refuse to, butt out. She can get into some very serious situations with people who might have some alcohol or drug addiction issues, and some more serious crimes. Now, she's paid to do this work, but the crimes that she's dealing with are very minor issues. If there's a serious event on the bus, then she would have the driver instantly contact dispatch, who would contact the police, and the police would come and intervene in more serious things. And as you can imagine with this series, some of the crimes either evolve into some pretty serious issues or they merge with something else that's going on in the city. And so it's a gray area. I still think of her as amateur because technically she's not law enforcement. She doesn't have anywhere near the level of training that a law enforcement officer would have. And yet she has, and her crew, the co-workers, supervisor, have a pretty professional and open communication with police as things come up in the city.
Excellent. Judee, you're, I think, the one who skirts the line the tightest. Judee, you took a mystery writing course by Nicola Furlong and was encouraged by Lou Allin, which is excellent person to get encouraged to. So you're currently working on your first book, and Embracing Murder and Mayhem. You have the sleuth Newton Figby, who you like to say is best fueled by Belgian dark chocolate. The reason I say you skirt the line is he is, as you told me, an ex-police officer wanting to get into private detective, not there yet, sort of considering the options. But you believe he still would be slotted as amateur sleuth. Why do you have to feel that?
I don't think he really fits as an amateur sleuth, but in some ways I suppose he does. My guy is a retired police detective. After 20 years, he decides to retire and becomes a private investigator. He figures it's less stressful. So as a private investigator, he hasn't really had any clients as yet. He's just newly licensed, and he's sort of feeling his way because there are things that he can and can't do as a private investigator and as a retired police. As a retired policeman, he actually got his license really quickly because he doesn't need to go through all the bureaucratic things that a layperson would do to become a private eye. But as a retired cop, he's got certain things that he's really good at. He knows how to do the surveillance and all this other stuff. And so, as I said, he's sort of feeling his way around being a private eye. It's very new to him. And there's things he would automatically do and then realize maybe he can't quite do that legally. But because he's got the contacts and he's got the know-how of how to get into these sites, he can actually get the information he needs without doing it illegally.
Mm-hmm. That's sort of a trope that a lot of amateur detectives in our story writing have, that sort of connection to police enforcement. So they're not a police, they're not a cop. In my case, I do also have an amateur sleuth, and her daughter is in UVPD, so she kind of squeezes her for information on times. Obviously, Judee, you still have, your lead still has a connection, but Debra and Winona, is there that sort of link to law enforcement that gives them an inside scoop sometimes?
Yeah, I've got Jason's brother-in-law is a retired cop, and he helps him out in situations sometimes. Gets him out of some trouble in one of the novels, and gives him some information in another of the novels, but it's very, very unofficial. But he's connected. He's connected to an on-the-job cop in London who has also helped him out. So.
Any connection, Deborah?
Casey, one of the things that she does in her life is take criminology courses. She has plans of bettering herself and perhaps changing careers down the road, but that's still a gray area. And one of her classmates is a Vancouver police patrol officer, and he's been a patrol officer for several years, and they struck up a friendship. And so she calls him when she needs some advice, or she's dealing with a particular crime or situation that happens to be in his zone that he's patrolling. And so they do cross paths professionally, but they're also friends. And she calls them up once in a while. But in her line of work, most of the contact, if the police want personnel to observe a particular situation, they would contact Casey's supervisor, and he's the one that would have the contact with various law enforcement jurisdictions, and it would be filtered down to her. So it's fairly indirect, but she does come across them when she experiences a crime. The police are called. Then yes, she meets several different types of officers through her work.
Thank you. Again, not trying to stick 100% to the definition, but one thing that sticks out to me for the amateur sleuth is they stumble upon and set out to solve a crime, as opposed to like trying to find the crime themselves. Would that be true with all our stories? Judee, I don't know your story. Would that be true for Newt's first case?
Are you talking to me? I'm sorry.
Sorry, Judee. Yeah. I think you're writing about Newt's first case. So is it? Would you say he stumbles upon the first one?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Oh, sorry. Would you say he stumbles upon his first case? Like, is he actively trying to find a client, or is he, does his first case come to him? I think it's a family matter, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. He unfortunately becomes involved in his first case because it's his brother-in-law who gets murdered. And it's such a bizarre crime because he can't figure out why. And there are so many things that were such a puzzle. And Newton has this mind that likes to figure on puzzles. And because this first murder had so many puzzling things about it, it really brings him in as a family member and as a police consultant, which is how he gets back involved with his former partner and working with the police.
That's interesting, and I wonder about the rest of the group. I know in my case, I write about a grandmother who stumbled upon her first case the same way. But you said something that mirrors my character in that your character loves solving puzzles. And I think mine does too, or I know mine does too. It's what draws her to becoming an amateur sleuth. Debra, Winona, do you feel the same thing with your lead? Like, do we have a common bond there?
Yeah, my Jason did his first mystery, Disturbing the Peace. His son was a film student and asked him to try and track down a missing musician who'd been missing for about, 4 or 5 years after he went to a music festival in northern Alberta. So Jason ends up getting on a plane and going to Peace River, Alberta in the middle of February, which is a whole other adventure. But that was his first introduction, and he discovered that he was really good at solving mysteries like that. So in the next one, an old friend shows up and asks him to try and find some money that's gone missing from a stripper's locker at a lap dancing club in London. So Jason gets involved in that and does that. And the next one that came along was just a fan of the band that Jason's rehearsing with, and his got some new information about a girl who went missing, a long time ago. And she was a fan of the band too. So Jason's drawn to it to try and solve it just because he's intrigued by the whole situation.
Debra?
Well, Eric, let's put it this way. In Casey's world, crap happens. And in book one, she's working on the bus, she's doing something, and it's the police who come to her to tell her that her father's been murdered. And so the work on the bus actually becomes a subplot to the main story, which was that indeed her father, because she had buried him 3 years ago. So who is this dead guy they're telling her, is her father? In book two, she comes to work and finds out from her supervisor that her coworker has been murdered. In book three, she is on the bus on Granville Street, which is a very busy thoroughfare in Vancouver. And she sees two cars street racing, and they hit a jogger in the intersection. And she jumps out and tries to help the jogger, and the jogger passes away. And in those particular books, the work that she's doing on the bus is almost a subplot to the main crime that she's pulled into for various reasons. In books 5 and 6, Knock Knock and The Blade Man, the crimes that are happening on the bus are much more closely tied to the murder. So it does really merge into one big thing that's going on in her life that she didn't ask for, but as I said, crap happens. So
Yeah, excellent. So, yeah, would you say though, like she probably could step away from like the hit and run on the third book? She could step away from. Is it her character to instill herself into that mystery?
It is. She feels terrible for that woman, and she is contacted by the family to thank her for trying to save their daughter. And she ends up going to the funeral, and she meets a young reporter there who's been doing a series of stories on street racing, and the deaths start piling up, and she's drawn into the whole street racing scene and murder because the reporter is getting in really deep. And Casey also feels not only a need to watch out for her, but she has a huge moral compass. She needs justice. She needs to find out who's responsible for this and hold them accountable. And this drives her in a lot of the plots, is this huge moral compass that she needs to put right.
I think actually that touches on a new subject in the sense that I'm pretty sure most amateur sleuths must have a strong moral compass. Because why else do it, right? Why else solve the crime if they're not getting paid for it? Why else insert themselves and put themselves in danger, right? So I would say with my character too, a strong moral compass is probably an important characteristic for an amateur sleuth. Winona, so you mentioned a few times that Jason's a musician. He's the son of two very famous musicians, and he's grown up in the spotlight his entire life. So he often crosses paths with diehard fans and other, people who know him, right? Would you say that makes his, being an amateur sleuth and hiding in the shadows, would that make, give some interesting interactions and complications to his task?
It does, actually, and I play with that all the time. He has a wariness of these people. I would call them fans or obsessives, but he also understands what makes them tick, so they show up in my writing a lot. And I've done stuff like that myself. I wouldn't say I've been overly obsessive, but I have been a fan. One of the things that people don't know about me is that I ran a fan club for the Monkees when I was 12. and I contributed stories to a little journal called the McCallum Observer, which was for David McCallum, who was Ilya in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. He's on NCIS. And for 12 years, I ran a website for the British actor Sean Bean. So I'm very well acquainted with fandom in its various sources. So would you like me to read story now.
Please.
Eric.
Please
Okay, so this is a little scene where Jason interacts with an obsessed fan in Lost Time, which is the current novel. You have to imagine me as a guy with an English accent. I'm really sorry, I can't do an English accent, or be a guy. But I was approached by a guy wearing a hand-knitted V-neck sleeveless pullover and a shirt and tie. I guess he was probably about my mom's age, early 70s anyway. He had very neat gray hair, combed carefully, and a pink and white face. He was carrying an old-fashioned leather school satchel. "Hello, Jason," he said. I was pretty positive I didn't know him, but that happens a lot. I perform, I'm in front of people, I enter their lives, and because of that, there's an assumed familiarity, on their end anyway. "Hello," I said, doing my best to convey the impression that I was actually looking forward to an uninterrupted lunch on my own. "Duncan Stouffer," he said, sticking out his hand. I shook it. "Hello." I sat down. He remained standing. "I tried to see you this morning at the Manor, but your security guard wouldn't let me in. I'm a huge fan of Figgis Green." Did he want me to sign something? Was he going to tell me about his extensive record collection, his sister's grandchildren, his dodgy insides? He looked the sort of person who maintained a journal about his bowel movements. Excellent contribution this morning. "Nothing today, requires an investigation." "I have something I think you might be interested in. Might I join you?" Without waiting for me to reply, he appropriated the chair on the other side of the table. "There's a missing girl," he said. "I've approached the police, but they simply aren't interested." "Why not?" I asked. "They're of the opinion that the young lady in question is dead." "Why would they think that?" "She was declared legally dead by her mother a few years after she disappeared." "Well," I said, "that more or less closes the book on the case, really. However, they are wrong." He placed the old leather satchel he'd been carrying onto his lap, opened it, and proceeded to transfer its contents to the tabletop in neat, perfectly aligned stacks. "I took a lot of photos of Figgis Green when they were at the peak of their popularity in the mid-1970s, he said. And there they all were. Some were in color, some in black and white. Each had a label affixed to the back with meticulous printing identifying the date and location. "Fairfield Halls," he said, reading them aloud. "Croydon, October 1st, 1973. Brangwyn Hall, Swansea, November 13th, 1975. Sheldonian Theatre, Oxford, July 10th, 1976. "Yes, I understand," I said. "August 1st, 1974, the Wiltshire Folk Festival." I glanced at all of the pictures. I didn't have a lot of choice. Duncan was sliding them in front of me, one at a time, helpfully moving the plate with my baguette off to one side to accommodate them. "I'd forgotten about this roll of film," he said. "I'd put it away in a drawer and then, you know, things." He gestured in a way that suggested his unreliable lower colon or his grandchildren's tonsils had interrupted whatever plans he'd had for that particular summer. "I found it last month while I was having a clear out and I sent it off to be developed. I'd labeled the film canister, of course, so I knew it was from the festival, but it's this which captured my attention." He held the picture up for my benefit. Pippa Gladstone. There you go.
Well done, Winona. Before you proceed, I just have to ask, that was pretty funny. Would you say you mix in a lot of humor in your stories, or was that just coincidence?
I do. I find humor, I don't believe in just total drama. I think in real life, there's drama and there's humor, and humor finds its way into the most tragic circumstances and into the most ordinary circumstances. And if it presents itself, I put it in because I love to find the humor in situations. I really do. So I don't start out to write a comedy. I can't force it. It's just organic. It has to appear.
Well, that's your voice, right? So good job. Now, Judee, I believe you're working on your first book. And you came up with a character named Newton Figby, which is interesting in its own right. And I've read a little bit of the history that you've given this individual now. Like you said, sort of skirting the limits of amateur and detective. How did you come up with such a character?
With Newton?
Yes.
It was a class assignment, actually, when I was taking a writing class. And I had to come up with an idea for something. And I landed on a private eye that I decided to name Newton Figby, mainly because I was eating a fig Newton at the time. And I figured, okay, Newton Figby sounds like a really good name for a character. And that's how he got born. Yeah, he was kind of cool. So I kind of worked on that and got him going. And he changed. He evolved, let me say, because it's a work in progress. And this work started a couple of years ago. And every time I picked it up, I really, really liked him. So I kept changing little bits and pieces until he finally got to where I want him. And of course, as a retired cop and now a private eye and working on a case that's close, the victim was close to him, his brother-in-law, it kind of spurred him on and stirred him on and got him moving. So yeah, he's kind of a neat character in that when he gets stressed out, and he does get stressed out, he has to have his dark Belgian chocolate. It's the only thing that'll get him past the stress. Anything with chocolate, that's it. And if he gets really stressed, he goes up on the rooftop and plays his grandfather's old trombone to jazz, what he thinks is jazz, but he really loves Louis Armstrong. So he plays a lot of Satchmo's pieces up on the roof. But mainly he's a chocoholic, detailed, driven detective who loves puzzles. Can I read you a little bit?
Please do. I was going to ask.
Cut me off if I'm taking too much time. Newton Figby, retired homicide detective and newly licensed private investigator, roared up in his Harley motorcycle and parked behind a crime scene barrier. Yellow tape marked off the area around Stacy's Pastries. Flashing red lights from the ambulance parked at a sharp angle against the curb, and two patrol cars still flashing its red and blue lights blocked the neighborhood street. It was a middle of the night scene Newt was famous with, but familiar with, and if it wasn't for the call from his former partner, he would still be tucked snug in his bed. Several of his former colleagues recognized him and knew the pastry shop was owned by Newton's brother-in-law. It was also a cop's favorite stop where the Stacys were generous with their pastries. Hey, Newt, Dee's in the back room. Lindsay's with a neighbor. I'm sorry as hell we got here too late. The policeman monitoring the crime scene traffic told him. I need to see Dee, Charlie. I'm here as family, not a cop. Go on in, Newt. Henry was a damn good guy. Tell Dee we'll be working full out on this. Newton entered the familiar bake shop, now bustling with crime scene technicians, the coroner, first response cops, and two homicide detectives. Henry's body was still on the floor, traces of the moved icing from the bakery's signature extravaganza cupcakes smeared on his mouth, and a bullet hole in the middle of his forehead. A piece of wavy brown hair fell across his right eye, the look of surprise frozen on his still features. A stainless steel bowl of purple butter icing had fallen on the floor, leaving splatters of purple icing near the body. A piece of dark chocolate, which Newton recognized as a piece of Kellogg's dark chocolate mint, was on the floor, just out of reach from Henry's outstretched arm. Newton stared with anger and disbelief at the image of his brother-in-law, owner and baker of Stacy's Pastries, murdered and sprawled in an undignified fashion on the bakery floor. Should I keep going?
How much more would you like to read? Ah, you stopped yourself already. Sorry, Judee. Never say, can you keep going? Just keep going.
Keep going.
I would want to say,
Give a chance.
In your bio, you said that you had strong words of encouragement from fellow peers. Please include my name too. I want to read your first book, Judee. That sounds really intriguing. So keep writing. I know the first one's the longest. The hardest one is the first one.
Thank you.
So Debra, again, because we're friends, I know that you used to worked in security yourself. So I wonder, how did that change it? Is there similarities or differences between your real life experiences Are you Casey? And you just didn't tell us.
It's funny, Eric, because a colleague read one of my books and she says, "Oh, I see you and Casey," and I don't. Mainly because I've been working with this character for so many years. The first book was published in 2011, and it took nearly 2 years to get published once I signed the contract. So, and then I had been working on the book for a good 10 years before that. So I have aged at a much, much faster rate than Casey has. And the issues that she has as a 30 to 33-year-old range is completely different than my issues now that I'm 30 years older than that. So there are parts of me that I think are probably like her. I think she's like most writers. She's an alter ego. She's what I would be if I was braver, if I was more reckless, if I was less filtered in my thoughts and opinions. And so there are some similarities, that she's what I would be if I was, you know, all out throttle and kind of a less reserved person. So. But, yeah.
Do you have any examples?
Yeah, I'm going to read from the first book, because mystery readers like to start at the beginning of a series. So I'm going to read from The Opposite of Dark, which, as I mentioned before, is the opening. And this is really a story about family. But to give you an example of Casey's way of dealing with things, which is quite different from what I would do, I'm going to read an excerpt from the first page. Okay, and she's at work. The suspect pressed his thigh against hers. His gray suit, crew cut, and square glasses portrayed respectability, yet his flushed middle-aged face and wandering hand suggested something else. His hand crept closer to her thigh. He always chose the right side of the bus, always picked an aisle seat near the exit, and always made his move as the bus approached its next stop. Lately, he'd grown reckless by staying on the M3 instead of switching routes like he used to. Fingers spidered closer to her leg. Casey watched Benny drive. As arranged, she would speed dial Benny's cell number just before she was ready to nab the guy. Victims had reported that the suspect didn't carry a weapon, so Benny would keep the doors shut until she'd cuffed him. The problem with this plan was the passenger distracting Benny with loud complaints about dirty seats and rude passengers. The M3 approached Commercial and Broadway, and the suspect's thigh nudged Casey's a little harder. She removed her cell phone from her pocket. Adrenaline raced through her as she watched pedestrians head for the SkyTrain entrance at the intersection's southeast corner. The light turned green, and the bus eased forward. Sweet, overripe aftershave nauseated her. Oh crap, the jerk was panting. Fingertips crept toward the garter peeking below her miniskirt. Casey hit speed dial, then shoved the phone in her pocket. The suspect moaned. Benny eased the bus to the stop as the pervert squeezed her left thigh. Right. Casey grabbed his wrist and flashed her ID badge. MPT security. Your party's over, dude. The man jerked his arm free. A moment later, he was out and running. Benny had missed the signal. And she goes after him, and she tears after him. No way would I do that. I'll see you again sometime.
Great. Thank you all for the readings. I sort of want to end on this note. See, we had this discussion earlier on, and I think our readers, I guess, either blur the lines or get confused between the different genres. And is an amateur sleuth a cozy, or in your sense, Deborah, like you seem to be verging on perhaps a thriller? Do we cross boundaries a little bit and get into a little bit? Like personally, again,
yeah,
I would think I'm easily a cozy. I follow the rules of cozy. I just happen to have an amateur sleuth.
Yes, I see myself as amateur sleuth, but I do understand that not a lot of readers understand what amateur sleuth really means. And it is open to interpretation. Amateur sleuth for me means a little bit edgier. There's a little bit more violence. There may be some 4-letter words in it, but it's still all about solving the crime. It's a whodunit. So in that sense, you could call it a cozy. And the fact that she's not official law enforcement, you know, certainly makes it an amateur sleuth to me. I have been labeled thriller writer, which again, I don't really agree with, because I focus on the whodunit, the trying to solve the puzzle, put the pieces together and figure out who the killer is at the end. And sure, you always have this big confrontational climatic scene between protagonist and villain, but that doesn't necessarily make it a thriller. I think of thrillers where the stakes are higher and it's a little more international or global, a little more espionage type of thing. And that is definitely not what I'm writing. So when people call it a thriller, I sort of do a double take and I go, oh, okay. if that's what you define it is, then that's fine. But I'm not personally going to get stuck on labels. You know, I know for marketing purposes, yes, I do have to do that, but you know, call it what you will, let readers decide what it is.
Judee, any thoughts?
I like Debra's thought that it's more a whodunit than an amateur sleuth, because it's really a mystery and a puzzle, and there's bodies involved, and it really is like, who did it? And when I think of that, I think of Agatha Christie and all these other ones, the early ones that had these mysteries. And they, you know what, we didn't have a genre back then. It was just something that people enjoyed. And as long as you enjoy writing it, that's the main thing. And finishing.
Finishing is key.
That's the hard part.
Winona, any thoughts?
Yeah, Jason's certainly got a lot more guts than me and a lot more courage. And he's probably the extension of me if I was going to be involved in something that required solving. It would be his persona that would do it, because I would never get past step 1 because I'm so timid. But yeah, I don't see myself as writing a cozy at all, because there's just too much swearing and too much sex and too much violence in my stories. So amateur sleuth, yes. And I was saying before, I want to create my own subgenre of amateur sleuth, professional musician. But yeah, it's more about here's this guy in this situation. This is what he does for a living. And on the side, he happens to be very good at solving whatever mystery comes along. So that's what I'm focused on. And I've got the same problem as Debra. For marketing purposes, I end up having to be slotted somewhere. So I'll just go along with whatever people want to think.
Yeah, let the audience sort it out, right? Well, thank you everyone for participating in our first episode. If you're watching this either on Facebook or on YouTube, we tried out a different format. We didn't want to go with just a straightforward reading or straightforward interview. So if you enjoyed the format, please leave a note. We do appreciate it very much. Thank you to everyone, and good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Yep,
Bye.
bye-bye.